Hello, readers. Jim Piddock is a longtime actor and writer of stage and screen, whose film credits include Lethal Weapon 2, Best in Show, and You Will Meet a Tall, Dark Stranger. And he's just written the story of his life in the new book titled Caught with My Pants Down and Other Tales from a Life in Hollywood. Jim, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
Very good, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning to you. So what was the moment that you realized that you had what it takes to be an actor, as displayed in a movement class in college following a particularly filling Chinese food lunch?
I love talking to people that have read the book. It was one of those seminal moments in life, my first day at drama school, when you're trying to impress everybody. And we had, as you say, I went for a very large lunch. I wasn't used to being up that early because at university I'd rolled out of bed usually about 12 o'clock. So it was a full day for me. And by lunch I was really hungry. So I went to this local Chinese restaurant, ate pretty much everything on the menu, waddled back to the drama school and discovered we had what was ominously called movement class first thing in the afternoon. And that was certainly not the kind of movement that I had in mind. But I went into the class, and we had to wear these, it was the late 70s, the guys had to wear these awful outfits. They were basically black tights with black roll neck sweaters, and the women were in black leotards. So they looked fine. They looked kind of fairly cute, and we looked awful. And I was highly embarrassed by the whole situation. And went into the class, and it was a slightly camp American teacher who said, okay, we're going to do headstands now. And so he got us all in a line and in front of this mat. And he said, you go into a headstand, two people will hold your feet, and then I'll say release and you come out of it. So I watched a few people do this and was kind of ominously kind of thinking this is getting worse and worse, that these people are really good. And I'm trying to impress, as everybody is. So anyway, I got into my headstand and it was okay. I was just thinking, I'm ahead here. This is not terrible. And then he says the magic words as people are holding my feet in position, and release. And so I came down on the mat, and as I hit the mat, I did actually release the loudest, hardest, sharpest fart that you have ever heard in your life. It was like a gun going off. It was like a starting pistol. And I lay there with my eyes closed, just with my life or my non-life in show business flashing in front of me. And I thought, well, what could I do? I could be a lawyer. No, I can't, because I can't read those long books. That's terrible. What am I going to do with my life? And it was like that moment when, if anybody has children who's listening, you'll know when a baby or kid, toddler falls over, there's those 2 or 3 seconds where you're waiting for the inevitable scream and tears. And it's just that horrible pause beforehand. And there was this horrible pause, and I lay there with my eyes closed, just thinking, oh no, it's coming, it's coming. The derision, the laughter, it's going to explode any second. And nothing came, absolutely nothing. So I kind of cautiously opened one eye, and there was the entire class standing above me, looking down at me as if they were looking into an open grave. And I heard the teacher say, oh my God, what was that? And so without a beat, I said, it's my ankle. It's an old soccer injury. It goes every so often. And he said, oh God, help him up. Somebody help him up. So these two very nice actresses helped me to my feet, and I limped, or fake limped, over to a bench nearby. And I sat out the rest of the class. And as I watched them go through these routines of awful things, I said to myself, you've got what it takes to be an actor. It was a seminal moment. I thought I could leave drama school now on day one. I don't need anything else. I can do it. Of course, I did need many other things, but it was a moment where I suddenly thought, yeah, that's it. I think I can do this. I can fool people. Of course, the kind of postscript is after the class in the men's changing room. Everyone's sort of saying, "You okay? You okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's feels better actually already. You know, sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's an hour, but right now I feel fine." And they all sort of drifted off to the next class, and one guy hung back, and he actually also happened to be an American. He was an American student who'd come over to England, and he said, Jim, and he said this more of a statement than a question. He said, Jim, you farted, didn't you? And I said, yep, I did. And he put his hand up and went, fucking A, man. And that was it. My reputation, certainly among the men, because the word spread quickly, quicker than the fart. So I sort of became a bit of a folk hero on that first day. But yeah, that's the first chapter of the book, which gives you a preview of the type of book it is. I mean, you call it my life story. I guess it is a quasi memoir. It's really a collection. What started out as a collection of humorous and weird and extraordinary stories of my 44 years in show business. I mean, I have literally worked with everybody and anybody, I mean, in show business.
It comes in right around 300 pages, and you're right, it's chock full. I mean, it's one story after another. You really don't waste any words in this book.
And it's shameless name dropping. I mean, I say at the beginning, I'm unabashedly going to name drop because that's what people want to hear, and those are the good stories. Not always. I mean, some of them are not about show business, and there's quite a few life stories in there that I think are fun. And that was the criteria. I mean, there are, as you say, it's 300 pages. There's 38 chapters. Then none of them are particularly long, but if there wasn't a good anecdote or a funny story or a meaningful story for me and for other people, more importantly than me, it wasn't in. I cut it. It was not in the book. So it's not like, and then I did this, and then I was in this film, and then I did that TV show, and then I did that play on Broadway. That to me would be boring. It would be boring. The story of my life told that way, it would be really dull, and it would be for anybody else. So it really was set out to be a piece of entertainment and humor with a bit of philosophy and the judgments that I make. I mean, I do draw conclusions from all these stories. And the conclusion from that one was that you can fool most of the people most of the time, but you can't fool everyone. Which is not a unique expression at all. But you know, I think, and what's refreshing for me about the book is that some stuff came out when I was writing it. It became a slightly deeper book on a certain level, in that I do think there's some sort of serious philosophy that comes out of it that I've learned through, I mean, I'm in my mid-60s now, that people seem to be relating to, and the stories of birth and death and love and loss and things that are very relatable. And that was important to me too. When I write movies or TV shows, I don't want to write just about that subject. That subject has to be bigger than me. So, I mean, let's take an example. If you're writing about British runners winning an Olympic medal, you know, if you do that, it's a boring story. If you write Chariots of Fire, it's about something else. You know, it's a movie that wins an Academy Award. The same with the King's Speech. If you write about a king, a monarch trying to get over a stutter, who cares? But when you write it the way it's written, it becomes a story that everyone can relate to, and it becomes bigger than what it is. And I wanted this book to reach an audience well beyond people in show business, people that care about show business, people that want to be in show business, people that read trashy magazines. All those people are naturally going to enjoy it for various reasons, but I wanted it to reach beyond that. And the most satisfying thing since the book was released 3 weeks ago is that I have had a response from 2 ministers in the Midwest, 2 religious ministers. I've had a response from a 20-year Army veteran in Brooklyn. I've had various people who I've on surface would say, what do they have in common with this, you know, relatively well-educated Brit who's danced his way life through show business and stuff, and Hollywood, and you know, he's a Hollywood elite, who cares, and all that crap. But these people, you know, contacted me and actually had me on their own podcasts because they said that they related to the book so deeply, and it meant an enormous amount to them, and they connected with it. That to me was worth a million great reviews. I mean, it really was so so heartening to me that I knew that the book has the possibility of getting way beyond just another memoir, because I really didn't want to write that. I'm not well known enough. You know, I'm a working actor whose face people know, but nobody really knows my name. And most people will recognize the face, or certainly will absolutely know one of the 130 something shows I've been in and films. So I knew that that's not going to sell the book. So what has to sell it is that it's worth reading for its own sake.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I think myself and plenty of others have enjoyed your comedy over the years is that there's a certain stoicism to it, Jim, and that
Uh,
implies being in touch. A lot of people associate stoicism with emotionless. No, that's not true. People who are stoic, they get emotional. It's just you have a good command over your emotions and also an understanding the full spectrum of emotions too. For instance, you did just mention that you do touch on death in this book. You were in your 20s when your father died suddenly and unexpectedly, which
yeah.
you learned on a phone call from your mother. How did this affect you going forward?
Well, again, I was 22, and it was completely unexpected. He literally got up one morning. He was in his 50s, mid 50s, and had a slight headache, and said to my mother, I'm not feeling great. I might stay at home today. And my daughter, not my daughter, my younger sister was at home, and she went off to school. I think she was the last person to see him actually alive. And she went off to school, and he said goodbye and said, I'm just going to stay at home today. My mother was off at work. She worked as a receptionist at in a doctor's office, and she came home for lunch, and he was unconscious. And he never regained consciousness. He died 2 hours later. He had a massive stroke. But I remember that call as if it was yesterday. I was on tour with this play, children's play. It was my first ever job. And we arrived at the school to do the show, and the head mistress, or the principal, or whatever you call it here, said, which one of you is Jim Piddock? And I kind of reluctantly raised my hand, and she said, oh, there's a phone call for you. Okay. And I went to answer it, and this was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And I hadn't spoken to my mother for a couple of days, and because we'd been on the road. And I remember so distinctly her voice saying, "Oh, Jim, it's Mum. I've been trying to reach you for a couple of days." And I said, "Oh, sorry, yeah, it's been difficult to." In those days, we didn't have cell phones, obviously. And she said, "I'm afraid I've got some bad news." And I'd just been home about a week before, because I hadn't been feeling very well, and I had some sort of flu and had tests done, and I was fatigued, and I thought, oh God, they got the results back from that. And of course, it was self-involved. It was immediately, oh, it's about me. And I thought, oh shit, there's something awful's come up in the tests. And then there was a speech. She said, yeah, I've got some bad news. It's Dad. And I went, oh, okay. She said, he's had a stroke. And I'm thinking, at that point in my life, is a stroke to do with your brain or your heart? I didn't know. I just knew it was something old people had. And I thought, well, he's young, so he'll be fine. He's had some sort of stroke. And then there was this beat. She said, he's had a stroke. And there was this beat, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then she said, and she could barely get the words out, and actually he died. And those 4 words, and actually he died, just was so impactful to me. I mean, it was such a, I remember thinking, died. It sounded like he'd done something. It was a verb. He died. It's like actually he, threw a ball. He I don't know, he read a book or whatever. It felt like he'd done something, but of course it meant he was no longer doing anything. He was finished doing anything. And it was so sudden. And I was in shock. I mean, I was in total shock for the whole of the next, several hours. I mean, the first sign was that I said to everybody, okay, let's do the show, which was insane.
Mm.
I mean, insane. And people looked at me like, what the hell is, they were like, we're not doing the show. Your father just died. You have to go home immediately. And so that was the first sign to me that I was not really absorbing this particularly. And then I made my way home by train and car and bus or whatever, got home, and, finally, when the reality of it hit, and I went into his office and at home, his home office, and came back from the hospital in a plastic bag, which was his watch, and I don't know what else it was, maybe his wedding ring. That was it. And I suddenly was furious. I was so angry that had survived and he hadn't. And then my sister sort of came in, and I lost it. That was when I lost it. I haven't talked about this actually on any. I've done probably 60, 70, 80 interviews in the last month, and I've not talked about that in depth. So that's an interesting question, because it took me just now into that place again. So that's the story. Yeah. And then obviously the book, as you know, is very lighthearted, but there are moments like that where things kind of get a bit more real.
No doubt about that. Do you think that your dad's death allowed you to let go of England and eventually moved west to pursue acting?
Yes, yes, another very good question. I think it did. I think it. I was in a after I'd worked a couple of years. It was my. I sort of then went on to do some repertory work in theatre, and then I was out of work. And I think being unemployed in the profession I'd chosen was sort of like, oh, okay, this is a reality slapping you in the face too. And I kind of went into a bit of a funk, and I think I write about it as being the darkest point that I remember. And yeah, I was offered an opportunity to go to Berkeley for 3 months to direct at the drama school where I'd gone to in London. They'd opened up in Berkeley. So they asked me to go and direct something. They'd obviously forgotten about the flatulence on day one. And they'd asked me to direct, which I had actually directed by then, a couple of things in the theatre in England, in the theatre that I was a member of, an acting member of. And so I went for 3 months, and I did a one-man show, which I had in my back pocket. I'd sort of asked this writer if I could do it. I'd seen it in England and I'd really liked it. And I did it in, it's about a soccer goalkeeper playing on a Sunday morning. And he said, the reason he gave me the rights, he was quite a well-known writer, actually. He said, if you can get this made in America, then yeah, all power to you. Yeah, and let me know if you can, and when you can't. And of course, I took it round to every theatre in San Francisco, and they all said, who are you? Quite rightly, and what the hell is a soccer? At that point in 1981, it was soccer wasn't exactly a big sport in America. So you know, I was at the end of that 3 months. I was about to go back to England, and then this guy who one of the hundreds of people I'd asked if I could do my play at his theatre called me up and said, the first play of our season's fallen through. How quickly can you get your one-man show together? So I found this director who I met out there, an English director who got it up in 3 weeks, the show up. And I think on the second night we had 4 people in the audience. It was an interesting experience. It was a very physical play. It was very, very demanding. I was jumping, leaping, talking, shouting, whatever, very intense for 90 minutes. And then the reviews came out the next day, and they were sort of, I couldn't have written them myself. I mean, they were just dream reviews, and the show was suddenly a big hit, and it got extended several times, and it was sold out. And that took me to New York. And then I did the show in New York eventually, but I think 2 months after I arrived in New York, an agent had seen a videotape of the play, which we had in those days, videotapes. Mm-hmm. And they'd sent me on an audition for a Broadway show. It was a production of Present Laughter, with George C. Scott was directing and starring in. And it was my first ever audition in New York, and I got the role. And it was Nathan Lane was in it, and Kate Burton was straight out of drama school. Dana Ivy's a wonderful New York actress. Christine Lahti, it was her first ever show in New York. And George was directing and starring it. And so 6 months later, after this, coming from nowhere, I was in a hit Broadway show.
Yeah, and I don't want to neglect that. People are just going to have to read the book to find out more details, some interesting details. Nathan Lane had a very embarrassing thing happen to him on something completely different. It was also his Broadway debut. And you also talk about working with George C. Scott and the joys and challenges that came along with that as well. Yeah. You also talk about lessons learned from guys like Sean Penn, underrating guys like Sean Penn and what their process is. But people are going to have to buy this book to check that out. I did want to ask you how Dustin Hoffman had an indirect and direct impact on you over the course of about 4 years.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. By the way, you were telling it about Nathan's embarrassing story. The book is full of embarrassing stories.
Oh, yeah.
Almost always at my expense.
Yes.
Hence the title, by the way, Caught with My Pants Down, which was based on not just one major incident, which has its own chapter, but 2 others. I mean, to get caught with your pants down in the estate of one of the wealthiest, best-known business tycoons in the world is quite an achievement, and I managed it. But to go back to your question, yeah, George, Dustin Hoffman, yeah, but that was, boy, yeah. In the lowest point that I mentioned, I was unemployed and living in this attic room in South London with it was like a 10 by 10 room I had a small black and white TV. There was no room for a bigger one, and a tiny bed. And I remember watching the 1980 Academy Awards. I think it was 1980. Yes, it must have been 1980. And just Dustin Hoffman won for Best Actor. I think it must have been Tootsie. I guess it was Tootsie. And he gave this speech about how he was accepting the award not just for himself, but for every actor who's out there striving, in obscurity to. I'm paraphrasing really badly. It was a very, very emotional speech, actually, about it was for everybody who's trying and doing it and not getting the same sort of recognition that he was getting at that moment. And I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and I was this kind of weeping, self-pitying mess. It was a just disgusting kind of a self-indulgent, self-pitying mess. And 3-4 years later, I was in a show called Noises Off, which was a big hit on Broadway, and we won sort of various awards. And I won an award, Drama Desk Award. And I remember at the ceremony, Dustin Hoffman was doing Death of a Salesman on Broadway at the same time, just around the corner. And my girlfriend at the time was in that. That's a whole other story, by the way. But I got to know Dustin a little bit, and he somehow took a shining to me. He liked me immediately, and first thing he said to me was, "Oh, you've got a Jewish soul. You've got a Jewish soul." And I didn't know what that meant. I still don't know what it means, but I'm happy to have a Jewish soul if I've got a Jewish soul. I was raised as a Catholic, Irish Catholic, I suppose. So I'm very happy to have a Jewish soul and an American spirit. But at this award, when I got mine, he was there with the cast of Death of a Salesman, and John Malkovich and all these other people were there who was in it. And he started a standing ovation for me because he liked me. And it was an incredible feeling. I mean, there are certain things that stick in you for reasons that are, tragic reasons, like we've talked about, my father and stuff. But that was, wow. I mean, I just couldn't. I had to pinch myself. 3 or 4 years ago, this man was an icon on the screen, and now he was giving me a standing ovation. It was a stunning moment for me, anyway. It was for me.
I can imagine. Now, you eventually moved from New York to try your hand in Hollywood, and this includes a bunch of different read-throughs to try and land parts, of course. What's your Larry David story, Jim?
I knew you were going there. Let me just preface my Larry David experience with this. And I'm not sure there's always a fine line between teaser and spoiler alert with these interviews. I eviscerate probably 3 or 4 people in the book. Mostly I'm extremely kind about people. I eviscerate 3 or 4 people. And as you can guess, one of them is now, as we hinted at, is Larry David.
Well, here's the thing with eviscerating Larry David, though. Like, this is what he has begotten with his life's work. I mean, this is what is expected of the guy from Curb Your Enthusiasm now.
Yeah, and by the way, I recognize him as one of the most talented people around. He's a brilliant writer, and he's a funny guy. But I had a horrendous experience, an audition experience, which I won't go into the details because you can read about it in the book, but it was horrific. And I never forgave him for that. That's why I can't watch Curb Your Enthusiasm. I mean, I've seen bits of it and I go, it's very good. It's really good. It's a sort of show, having done so many improvised movies with Chris Guest, I was obvious to be in it. And I just said to my agent, I don't think I could do it because I'd smash the guy in the face. I'm so pissed off still about what he did. And so, yes, he is one of the people. There are other people. One of them's dead, so they can't sue me. But there's only really 3 or 4 people I eviscerate. And in the chapter where I start saying that here are 10 major A-listers I've worked with, 9 I loved, and one was in the book we use a 4 asterisks word. One was a 4 asterisks, and you can fill in the blanks. But see you next Tuesday. Then I go on to actually sort of describe the 9 good experiences, and then in detail the one really horrific one. And I think in that chapter, in case anyone's thinking this is a book about sour grapes and bitterness, far from it. In that chapter, I actually rehabilitate many people's images, because there's a lot of candidates for that 4 asterisk word. There's 3, 4, 5 candidates, I think, that a lot of people guess would be. And so I actually say, no, they may have had a terrible reputation. They may be considered this, that, or the other. I actually had a great experience, and I love them for that, you know. So in that respect, I think this is a book about rehabilitating reputations. I'm really trying to sell this, aren't
I? No doubt about that. Now, the moment with Larry David involved an audition for Seinfeld. Do you remember the character that you were auditioning for?
Absolutely don't. No, I don't remember the character. I remember it was a British character. Okay. And there was Brits in there of all ages, shapes, and sizes, and so they obviously weren't quite sure what they wanted. And my experience, which I talk about, it happened to another actor who was considerably older than me, and I couldn't believe that the same thing had happened. It was so shocking to me. And then, I mean, the book is also some bizarre coincidences have occurred in my life. I mean, really bizarre. I'm not a great believer in, you know, serendipity and this happens for a reason, and there's a puppet master out there sort of, you know, controlling our lives. But sometimes you think maybe there is, because of some most bizarre things have happened. And I think I've met Larry David 3 times in my life. One was very recently at somebody's 70th birthday party. And it was, I just saw him across the room, and that was enough. I was then outside. But the week after that horrendous experience, which was, let's say it was 1985, I think. So it's a long, long time ago. The week after that, I went to a wedding, and it wasn't a well-known person at all. It was just somebody's wedding, a friend of a friend. And I was sitting waiting for the ceremony to begin. And who should come in and sit in the aisle about 2 seats away from me was Larry David. And I was still seating at that point. And I did refrain from, I thought that it was not great wedding protocol for one guest to actually lay another one out unconscious before the ceremony. So I behaved very well.
That's
yeah, I'm not a violent man. I'm too much of a coward. So that ended happily.
It's a good decision by you. Now, you mentioned Larry David's a good writer. You're a great writer too, as evidenced by this book. The list of 10 characters, I think, is a great example of that, because you do go through and say why you love the first 9 before getting to that 10th. I'm curious, Jim, do you have a favorite place to write, and why do you love writing there?
I have a couple of places I like to write. You know, some writers you see in Starbucks or you know, coffee houses. I shouldn't have mentioned a trade name. They're terrible. Anyway, you see them when you're typing away, and you go, especially in LA, everyone's a screenwriter in LA, you know, and I get that, because once I'm in the zone, and nothing can shake me out of it. It's a form of meditation. So I get why people do that and can do it. I have 2 places where I write. Here, right where you see me. I don't know if you put this out on video as well as audio, yep. But this is where I write. This is the Nerve Center. It's my office in LA at home. I did have an office separate from my house when my daughter was young, because I just needed to get out. It was too much going on, you know, with a young child running around, pulling your leg, screaming "Daddy." Which I love to come home to, but I needed to work. So this office is it's actually lovely. It's like a British club. I could spin the computer around. If you are on video, sure. You can see. Here we go. Look, I'll spin the computer around. It's all wooden panels, and it's got this lovely vaulted ceiling.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
And it's very kind of the guy who owned the house before me was an Anglophile, and he built this about 20 something years ago. And it's very comforting to me. It feels very much like a gentleman's club that's leather and wood and fireplaces. And this is where I feel really comfortable, and I can shut the door and whatever. And in London, I recently bought a flat there, and I have an attic room there that I write in, which is considerably more modest than this. And I find that's great. I can just lock myself away. So yeah, those are the two places. It's an interesting question, that, because I only really started writing when I moved to LA. And partly because I was now not doing theater every day and not rehearsing or doing 8 shows a week, so I had the time. But even when I tried to write in New York or London when I was there, I lived in London, in New York for 3 years, and obviously in London for 2 or 3 years before I left, in terms of being a professional. And I found it very hard to write. And I think it's because there's so much going on. There's so much stimulus in New York and London that I got distracted, or I couldn't sort of focus. And in LA, suddenly life was, the pace was slower. There was a lot more free time on my hands. It was a lot quieter, a city. And so it was almost like I found a refuge where I could write.
Although there are obviously differences, the way you feel about Vegas is kind of how I feel about New York City. It really is hard to be alone with your thoughts in either place.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Vegas, and I explain why in the book. It's just not my thing. I don't gamble, and I find the commercialism and it's depressing to me. It's depressing to see busloads of morbidly obese people, or people who saved up and they're just going to waste their fucking money, and it's depressing, and it's seedy, and I'm not averse to seediness. I worked in a sex shop, for Christ's sake, before I became an actor, so I'm not averse to seediness of any kind. But Vegas just seems crassly manipulative and abusive in many ways, and it's just the personal injury lawyer advertisements, billboards everywhere, and you're going, what, and advertisements for guns. And you're in Texas, so it's very much a pro-gun state, and I literally, as a foreigner, and everybody out who lives outside America, just does not understand the American culture when it comes to guns and religion to a degree. I mean, no, I've got nothing against religions. Well, I do have things against religions. That's not true. I think religions have caused most of the ills in the world. So why did I say that? I'm not against spiritual existence. I'm not against people believing in God at all. I think that's wonderful. But wow, we've gone from Vegas to religion. Anyway, I find that
we're going to talk about abortion next, Jim.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go there, and then you've lost your entire audience, and there's now one listener left, and it's my sister in England. Yeah, no, New York. I went to New York last week to do The Blacklist. The show The Blacklist, and I hadn't been back to New York for almost 10 years, and it's interesting you say that, because I felt an overload. It was sensory overload the first 2 days I was there. I felt almost agoraphobic. I was like, oh God, I just want to go back to my hotel room. This is so loud, so busy. And I felt like a boy who'd just stepped off a farm and been planted in the middle of Manhattan, a rural boy from Montana who's like, what the hell is this? What am I doing? Why are people living this way? But then I felt a bit more comfortable, and I remembered what it was like living there. It's also different. I was staying near where the World Trade Center used to be. And when I lived in New York, I never went that far south into Manhattan. So I didn't know that part of New York. And it's very modern and very concrete-y. And to me, it didn't seem like New York. It could have been anywhere. It could have been any city in any country. So that felt kind of slightly weird. But I literally was there to do the job. And then in my spare time, I was doing these type of things that I'm doing with you. I was just doing interviews about the book. So it was, yeah, but it's an interesting thing that you say that about New York.
You share your experience of working with some world-class directors, guys like Tom Hanks, Judd Apatow, Woody Allen, Harold Ramis, and of course, Christopher Guest, who you first worked with in Best in Show, I believe. How did you land your role in Best in Show? And were the scenes that you filmed with Fred Willard as funny in the moment as they turned out to be in the film?
Yeah, I ended up in that film because I knew Eugene Levy socially, not super well, but I knew Catherine better, O'Hara better. But I'd met Eugene a number of times, and I think I'd had dinner with him in Toronto when I was working there. And he'd obviously done Waiting for Guffman with Chris Guest, and that been fairly successful in the indie film way. And I got this call completely out of the blue, and it was Eugene who had just actually his own acting career had sort of gone into overdrive because of American Pie had just come out the year before, and he called me and said, "Oh, we're doing this film with another film with Chris, and it's about dog shows, and we just thought that there might be a role for you." And I was like, "Oh, well, great." And he said, "Would you come in and meet us at Castle Rock?" And so I went in, and I'd met Chris really peripherally a couple of times at parties, and he's more than Eugene. They're both, how do I put this politely? They're socially awkward, maybe is the polite. They're not particularly gregarious, and Eugene is more puppy trained. He's more house trained, so he can actually conduct a conversation socially. So I was in this office, and the two of them were just sitting there behind their desks, almost saying nothing, and telling me just, "Oh, the film's this is Fred Willard's going to play this bull in a china shop commentator, and we thought it would be interesting to have a straight Brit beside him," and that was it. And then I sort of kept filling the gaps, as one does, when you're with someone who's not very particularly forthcoming. You would know as an interviewer, you kind of fill the gaps quickly, and I just started babbling, somewhat like I have on your show, and I found myself just talking nonsense. It's like I didn't know what I was talking about, and I finally stopped and went, "This is just, I'm speaking for the sake of speaking." So I stood up and I said, "Chris, you don't know my work. Eugene does a little bit. Here's a DVD of my showreel or whatever. Have a look, and if it looks like the sort of thing, I'd be delighted to be in the movie." And I left. I just walked out, and I was driving home thinking, "Oh God, how could I have handled that any better? Why did I just keep talking nonsense?" And then the phone rang, and by that stage we did have mobile phones, and very quiet voice said, "Is this Jim?" I said, "Yes, it's Crystal Guest. Would you like to be in the movie?" And that was it. And I said, "Yes, I'd love to, thank you." And then, of course, then it got very complicated because I was doing a show I'd written, created, called Too Much Sun. It was a British sitcom with Mark Addy and Lee Majors, of all people, and Alex Jennings. It was for BBC, and I was writing and producing it and show running it, as it were. And it clashed. And so I managed to negotiate. The BBC let me out for 3 days to fly to Vancouver from London to do Best in Show, which they'd booked me for 3 days. And then I'd fly back. So I did the table read of the sitcom on Monday, flew to Vancouver and met Chris, Eugene, and Fred Willard on that Monday night. And then we're supposed to shoot Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but they were running behind. So we didn't shoot Tuesday. And I had a day off, which I was very happy about because I had such bad jet lag. And then they were still running behind on Wednesday, so didn't do that. And then I got a call on Wednesday night saying, "Well, we think we might have to even push this to Friday." And I said, "I'm afraid we can't, because I've got to be back in London for the taping of my show and the tech run of that before we shoot it in front of a studio audience." So on the Thursday, Fred and I shot from pre-dawn to post-dusk, just all our stuff in an empty stadium. They'd already shot the dog show, so we had a few extras behind us to make it look like there was the full stadium. And there was very little in the outline. Some of the outlines we write, because I've written 2 things with Chris too, a TV show and a movie. Some of them are quite detailed in terms of what the scene's about, and some suggestions of jokes and who does what, where, and when, and how. But this was simply the 2 commentators, just describe the characters essentially, and how I'm trying to keep the show on track, because we're on the air commentating on this dog show, while this idiot next to me is just saying the most stupid things. So they trusted Fred enough to just go. And I didn't know what he was going to do, because they, at the dinner on that Monday night, they'd sent me out the room when they wanted to talk about what Chris was going to do. So I wouldn't know. So all my reactions are genuine. And it was great for me because I hadn't done much improvisation. And I knew that my mandate was just to be a dog expert and to be real and be believable. And I'd studied this really incredibly tedious book called The American Kennel Club, something or other. It's like a Bible. So I'd learned all this crap about dogs that I could throw out there if we needed to have it. It wasn't funny. Well, I tried to, see if I could come up with something that was funny about it. But it was really just Fred, wind him up and let him go. I mean, it was like being in a clown car driven by a rambunctious monkey who's blindfolded and half drunk. I mean, it was just insane. I'm not to say that Fred was drunk, he wasn't, but that was the metaphor I'm using. He was nuts. I mean, brilliant. And I reacted to it as best I could. And people say, well, how did you keep a straight face? Well, if you watch the movie closely, I don't. I mean, there's times when you see me starting to laugh, but I knew that my character had to keep the show on track. So I control it and sort of smirk and go, yes, well, whatever, and then continue. And then I thought, I've got to build this in a way that's kind of amusing, because I knew enough about comedy that straight man, which I absolutely was in this, I'd never done that before. I'd always been the kind of goofy, clowny guy. And I thought I knew enough that if the straight man is genuinely straight, you can get as many laughs as the funny guy, or you can make them twice as funny. Either way, it doesn't matter. You still get twice as many laughs. It doesn't matter who gets them per se. So I figured that I had to continue this straight act, but I wanted to put a twist on it. So I became amused at first by him, then confused that anyone this stupid could be sitting beside me as a commentator on this show, and then sort of downright angry and annoyed. But I still have to hide that too. So it was a great object lesson for me in playing stuff very subtly. It was acting with a small a. And so I had to do it all with my looks and my kind of body language. And whilst I was saying one thing, you knew I was thinking something else or was annoyed or whatever. And that was a wonderful lesson for me because it was also all improvised. So I learned that I was a better actor when I was jet lagged. So don't think too much. That was the lesson, is don't think as an actor, just be and react in the moment. And that was a fantastic step forward in terms of my involvement as becoming an actor. And after that, I think I changed slightly how I approached comedy. I definitely was less broad I fell off the wagon now and again and did some shockingly overacting performances, but I sort of loved that dryness and that wryness, which actually is kind of who I am more, and save the big broad stuff for special moments or other people. Let them do that.
Monty Python reunions, things like that. Now, I just mentioned Harold Ramis as well. He gave what you consider to be some of the best advice of your life. What was it, Jim?
Yeah, it's great advice for anybody in any field, in any profession or any part of life outside work. Harold had this, it was great. He said, if you're in a room and you don't think you're the most smart or most talented person in that room, then go and sit next to the person who you think is. And it's just, it's a funny, wry piece of advice, but it's true. And actually, it was true of his career. Harold was a very, very clever guy and a very talented guy, but he managed to always, no one remembers him as much as they remember Bill Murray or whoever, it is. He was sort of the supporting actor, either as a director or a sidekick or, Dan Aykroyd. I mean, that's who you remember from Ghostbusters. Harold is the least memorable in a funny way, but he's there beside them, sitting next to them and standing next to them. And he's actually the brains behind it more than they are. So it was great advice. I mean, particularly for me, because I sort of related to that. And I've always been happy to be the sidekick or the brains behind something. And if I'm center stage with the spotlight on me, great, I'll take it. But I don't scream that has to be me all the time.
Harold was brilliant, and I'm glad that posthumously he's finally starting to get his proper due, especially as it pertains to the filmmaking process.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, Judd Apatow was a big fan of Harold's and did some stuff on him and since. And I think people inside the business knew Harold was a real mover and a shaker. Animal House. I mean, all from that, Caddyshack, they were all Harold's, brainchild pretty much. And he was the lead writer on all those things and then became a director. So I think people within the business knew, but he wasn't the face of it all. And I'm glad if it's, again, he died way too young. Harold, a great loss. But I think there was a part of Harold I always felt he left LA and moved back to Chicago where he was from. And I always felt when he did that, he sort of was almost saying, I've done what I want to do. And I know people that have reached that place in their career, and that's it. I don't know if I want or have the drive to say anything anymore. I've said it, and I think many famous actors have done that. It got to that point. I think Cary Grant, I remember reading his book saying, I just had enough of tripping over cables on dark sets, and I was happy to step away. I mean, all the kind of some of the greats, Marlon Brando, absolutely. Marlon Brando I have no reason to act anymore. He later in his life, he said, I've exorcised whatever those demons were, and for him they were demons. For me, I don't think they were demons. It was another motivation.
Well, science has found that some of the happiest people end up having 4 or 5 different career changes throughout their life. And that can happen earlier in life, of course, but especially later in life where you continue to find ways to reinvent yourself. I think you talked about this with moving to either the Bay Area, New York, or LA, like exiting whatever comfort zone that you're in, find something completely new. And it really forces you to focus and use your brain and pay close attention to what's going on around you. That's very healthy.
Absolutely. You know how when you go to a new place, you really are much more aware of things. You notice things so much more. You become a kid again, And I think one of the things that comes out of the book, and hopefully the life lessons, is that whenever I've taken a major risk and got out of my comfort zone, which it's hard for a lot of us. I'm a routine guy. I like to know I'm a homebody. I like to have my feet firmly on the ground. But for some reason, I'm not a gambler financially. I'm not a gambler physically. I'm a coward. I never had trouble gambling professionally because basically becoming an actor or a writer is a gamble in itself. So why stop there? So I never really shied away from making tough decisions, like leaving a successful theater career in New York and starting from scratch in LA, leaving, what was a beginning to be a career in England and moving and never going back. And sooner or later, someone will kick me out, but no, they can't now. I'm a citizen. But yeah, I think that's really important to do that in life. And as I say, for me, even if in the short term it's been painful, in the long term it's always paid off. And I think we're entering now. I don't know if I talk about this in the book, but I do believe this in my life, that we've been through the industrial age, we've been through the technological age. We're still in the technological age, obviously. We're almost entering the cyber reality age, virtual age. But I think that for most people of my daughter's generation, she's in her late 20s. And actually, even for people now in their mid 30s and upwards, we're in an entrepreneurial age. I think you said 4 or 5, it's been proven that people are happier. I didn't know that. That's a very interesting fact. But then it's very encouraging, because I think now anyone under 35 or 40 is likely to have 2, 3, 4, 5 careers. It's more than likely, unless you are literally going into a vocation like a doctor. And even I know one of my doctors left that in his late 40s, mid 50s, early 50s rather, and became a financial advisor. Just completely threw it up, and something he was doing as a hobby for people investing their money. He became a real whiz kid, in terms of the financial world. And he was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. That's what he'd done for 25 years or 20 years. So it happens, and even in those professions. My brother-in-law was a priest, and he's now he left the priesthood and became a married man with 3 children and now 3 grandchildren.
Oh,
so people
man,
change.
That's a pivot.
Yeah, people change. People have different lives, but now more than ever. My daughter's on her 3rd career right now, and she's doing very, very well at it. And a couple that had their hits and misses, but she learned an enormous amount. And I think that's important for people to realize. And you can't actually. It's much harder to be successful now just by picking a job, getting educated at university, getting your qualifications, and then that's it. You're set for 45 years until you get your gold watch, and you can then enjoy your retirement. I just don't think that's going to happen for many people anymore. And that's a good thing, by the way. I think it's a good thing. I think we get to lead 3 or 4 or 5 lives instead of 1.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Now, you're close friends with Eric Idle. What does Eric mean to you?
Eric has been a great friend for 25 years. We worked on one of the worst films ever made back in 1990 something or 6. And
it's so funny, real quick, Jim. It's so funny because I'd never heard of this movie before, but just hearing the premise and the satire potential, and also looking at the cast, I don't know how it didn't work better than that.
Well, I don't know, because when you see those films with everybody that's in Hollywood in them, there was a problem. The script was not good enough, but they needed to jam it full of people and pay people lots of money to try and make it work. And that was the case with this one. It just was, Joe Esterhaas wrote some great thrillers, Basic Instinct, all those, sexy thrillers of the 80s, but he's not a funny fighter. He's not a comedic writer. And that film was and directed by Arthur Hiller, who directed Love Story. So I had a bunch of scenes with Eric Idle and Naomi Campbell, the supermodel, and I talk about it in the book, so I'll leave it there. But it was an incredible experience, and I became friends with Eric. We have very similar backgrounds. Both of us lost our fathers at a very young age. His, way before mine, and his before he was, I think before he met him, he was coming back from the war. Eric describes in his great book, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. No, I'm plugging someone else's book, but I'm happy to, because Eric wrote such a beautiful foreword for my book, or as he calls it, a foreplay. So his father was coming home from World War II. He'd survived the war and was getting a ride home in a truck it was the back of a truck in England, getting home back to his hometown, that was full of steel pipes, and the truck got into an accident, and his father was crushed to death by steel pipes, which Eric tells at the beginning of his book, and he says he thinks it's where he got his sort of sense of irony and humor from. Because it's so dark, but the irony and the humor in terms of, I survived a world war for 5 years, and I'm literally 10 minutes from home or whatever, and that happens. You're going to have a sense of the absurd if that happens. And for me, Monty Python was a seminal kind of part of my upbringing. It was really a big influence, because up until that point, it was Benny Hill or Frankie Howerd or the comedians of those days, Morecambe and Wise in England. And suddenly you saw that humor could be really very, very smart and intelligent and cerebral, and also ridiculously silly. So that was very, very important to me. So I was delighted to meet Eric. That was just a thrill to me, to literally meet one of my idols. And it was delightful that we hit it off immediately. We made each other laugh, and we shared so much in common. We were both actors and writers, and we both love football, or soccer as you call it, and cricket. I also love baseball too. So we just, and he's probably been my closest friend in LA, and we spent time in France too. He's had a place there for years. in the summer. So yeah, he's a dear friend.
One of the things that this book is, as you talked about at the beginning of our conversation, Jim, is a bit of philosophy. So my last question for you is, what does it all mean?
In the conclusion of the book, again, I didn't set out to write a book that was sort of philosophical or any kind of self-help or anything like that, but it had just emerged as I wrote it. And I think the thing that struck me the most was, and I write about it in a almost a spiritual way, because it was the voice of a friend an actor friend who passed away. And I heard his voice in my head speaking, and whether you believe it was his spirit or my imagination, or I should see a mental health specialist because I'm hearing voices. I wrote it down, and one of the things is that it was a conclusion that makes sense to me. It's that every single second of our lives, we're making decisions, we're making choices, and that who we are and what our destiny is the sum result of all of those choices. Now, we all have major moments, crossroads in our life where we have to make a choice, and we know that defines where we go and how our life turns out. And so I think more than that, I think we're doing it every second. And like a pebble being thrown into a pond, those ripples and those sound waves travel way, way, way further than you think. You know, if I'm not particularly scientific, but sound travels infinitely almost. So I think that we have to be conscious of that, and then you live life to the fullest. And that none of what I'm saying is an original concept, but I think the way I can come to it through this book of telling funny stories, and this, I think, is a way that maybe opens the door to see that more clearly. Certainly it did for me, and hopefully, and the feedback I'm getting, it does for other people. Laughter opens a door to your emotions, and you can see things and feel things more clearly. And I'm a great believer in that every single minute or every single second you're making choices. You and I have made, in however many seconds we've been talking, we've made choices about what we say, what you ask me. That they're very thoughtful questions. Yours have been extremely thoughtful and very purposeful, but you made those choices of what to say, and I've made my choices. I chose to talk about my father's death, which I've not done in any interview thus far. So those things have an effect, and they may have no effect on anybody. And people may listen to this and go about their life without. And people may listen to this and go, oh, one day I want to interview people like him because, Trey is very good at it. And that's kind of fun to me. Or they may go, I want to do what Jim has done and try that because that sounds like fun. Or, I think I could have a shot at that. Or it may help people understand that we're not snotty Hollywood elites, liberal elites, all of us. We're a little bit, but not a lot. And I think that's important to open the door and go, this is who we are. This is what we should be. And on that note, that slightly more philosophical note, I really do think that's the sort of summary of the where I come to at the end of the book.
Beautiful. Well, I could have taken this conversation in seemingly endless directions. Could have asked about the sex shop. Could have asked about Bill Murray. But those are stories people are just going to have to check out in the book, Jim.
Easy pickings. That's low-hanging fruit. Yeah, good.
That's right. Jim Piddock is a longtime actor and writer of stage and screen whose film credits include Lethal Weapon 2, Best in Show, and You Will Meet a Tall, Dark Stranger. And he's just written the story of his life in the new book titled Caught with My Pants Down and Other Tales from a Life in Hollywood. There's multiple caught with his pants down moments in this book.
Yes.
Jim, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. Can I add one little epilogue? Sorry, sure. to our chat. The money from this book is all going to charity. It's going to two that I mentioned at the beginning of the book, which are very close to my heart, for encouraging people from underprivileged backgrounds to have get on in life and have the sort of advantages I that I had to give them that type of thing. I mean, I was privately educated and went to university, so I had a good start. And I think it's important that everybody gets a good start and equal playing field. So these are two charities. And then I was going to keep some of the profits of the book for myself, but the last month has been so devastating to watch the news every night that I decided that remaining 50% I was going to go to Ukrainian refugees, because that problem is not going away, and it won't go away soon, in terms of how they rebuild that country and where those refugees are housed and where they end up. So please, if not for me, fight for the causes. It's not about me; it's about them. Fight for those.
And I apologize. I do not remember the name of those charities. Do you have those on the top of your
Yeah,
head?
the one in Britain is called Palace for Life Foundation, which is in connection with the soccer club I'm very involved with, Crystal Palace Football Club, a Premier League club. They have a separate foundation that does amazing work in South London and around, of getting kids out of gangs, getting them up on the right path through soccer, other physical activities. They do immense work with handicapped children and I don't know what the right word is now. I'm of that generation. Is it disabled, handicapped? I can't remember. Disadvantaged children in one way or another. And the BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, has a program in America called Access for All, which does a similar type of thing. It's kids who don't have that opportunity to express themselves creatively. So it's a bit more arts oriented. And then if they're serious about it, a possible pathway into the industry, show business. So those two are that I chose, and I say that in the book at the beginning and at the end. I talk about them just so people know what their money's going to. And then the Ukrainian refugees. There's two, because I won't see any royalties for the first 3 months until it's done every quarter. I'm still narrowing down which of I think the best charity where the money will go to the actual right place rather than administrative costs. And there's a couple of charities that are doing stuff for Ukrainian refugees. So I'll pick one of those in the next couple of weeks. That's specifically, but it's going to go to one of them.
All the more reason for people to buy this book. Jim, thank you so much for all of it.
Thank you. Sorry I did that long postscript.
No, not apologies. I'm glad that we got it in there, because that's something that I probably should have brought up on my own.
No, not at all. And lovely to talk to you. It's early in the morning for me. I'm going to have my breakfast now.
Enjoy breakfast, Jim.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. Hear more of his work at gentlemanjesus.com. And thanks to Joshua Bates for the video editing. If you have any video editing needs, hit him up on Instagram at Forager Digital. And thanks to you for checking us out. You can watch, listen, learn, and connect for free at booksonpod.com. For Books on Pod, I'm Trey Elling. Good day.